This week, I built a bench out of reclaimed redwood. I made it easy. I used pocket screws and a simple design that with different lumber could be an easy weekend project built with basic tools. Recently, I was able to load up this pile of reclaimed redwood from a friend's property. It was some work, but my only regret was not getting more. He had around 10 piles like this. I could have totally packed them all into the backyard, maybe one in the trees, and finally one to hide the propane tank. Unfortunately, I just couldn't cover my entire yard with stacks of redwood. Since I've never worked with redwood before, I decided to do some research on what I'm dealing with. These particular boards were used for construction in Northern California over 100 years ago. When the building was remodeled, this wood was saved to keep it out of a landfill and to give it another life. Old growth redwood has incredibly tight growth rings because the trees grew much slower in packed forests. Each ring shows the wet and dry season as the tree grew throughout a year. Tighter rings makes it really strong and resistant to decay. Most of these old trees are protected and are no longer cut down. Using a planer was the quickest way to clean up these old boards. I made sure to wear my best respirator to keep my lungs healthy. I'm sure breathing in the old paint and dust isn't a good idea. I love sending rough wood through a planer to find out what it's going to look like. I only ended up cutting through one nail with my planer. Luckily, it didn't seem to phase my helical head, although I'm sure it shortened its life. Toward the end of this process, I started sanding one side of the beams with 40 grit so they did not tear up my MDF planer extension bed so much. Some of these boards were in a parallelogram. The way I decided to get a straight edge on these was to cut the edge with the track saw. The shape worked to my advantage because I didn't have the depth capacity to cut through these boards. With one straight edge, I could cut the other side on the table saw, and then the board could be flipped over for a full depth cut on the original side. For this one, I used the planer, and later on, I made the cuts on my table saw. That gave me two edges that lined up together so I could get to resawing these boards. Resawing is the process of cutting thinner boards from a thicker board, and usually the best tool for this is the bandsaw. Mine is just too small. I originally thought I would wait until I could upgrade my bandsaw before working with this redwood. I knew most of it needed to be resawn for this project, and I didn't want a lot of waste. When using a table saw to resaw, it uses up more material because of the thicker curve of the blade. After some thought and measuring, I figured there would still be enough thickness if I used my table saw, and these cuts were much easier than I expected because redwood cuts much easier than hardwood. It did make a big mess and my dust collection could not keep up. I used a few shims on the second pass to ensure the wood wouldn't pinch the blade and cause kickback. I wanted to be safe, but this wood did cut pretty easily with the ripping blade. With enough boards cut in half to use for the top and skirts for this bench, I ran them through the planer and jointed the edges. On the joiner, I used the book match trick I went over in the video I made about jointing. This ensures that the board edges match up to create a tight line when they're glued together. After gluing the three boards together for the top, I was able to trim the bench top to the length I needed. I didn't film it originally, but I did add some rounded corners by using these 3D printed corner templates. I'm really not trying to get into 3D printing, but I feel like it could be inevitable because it could be really beneficial in the shop. To use these, I trace the shape, I make a cut to remove most of the waste material on the bandsaw, and then I use the template with the flush trim bit on the router to make perfect round matching corners. For the legs, I took some shorter pieces and ripped them down to a size that I thought would look good with the rest of the design. And for the skirt pieces, I did the same. I was advised later on after cutting these to not reach past the blade to grab my workpiece. I've had a habit of doing this to keep each piece snug against the fence of the table saw. It is unlikely that there would be kickback with this wood, but it is a habit I am breaking. It isn't worth it if the wood catches and pulls my hand back into the blade. Safety has to be a top priority. With all the skirt pieces and legs cut, I got really crazy here and added a round over for the utmost level of style and artistic charisma that any piece of furniture can possibly portray. I'm just being sarcastic. Roundovers are amazing, but this bench is quite simple. Finally, I set up a stop block for the legs and cut them all to the same length. To attach the bench top and allow for seasonal wood movement, I use these Z-clips. They will be screwed to the bench tops to hold it tight against the bench skirt while allowing for movement when the grain on the top expands and contracts. I measured with my fence the distance from the bench top to the location of the groove I cut for the clip. I then made a cut deep enough for the clips to slide into the entire length of the end pieces. For the side pieces, I dropped them on the blade and made the cut about 2/3 of the length of the skirt. I will show you more how the clips work when I install them. To connect the legs to the skirt pieces, I wanted to keep it simple, so I used pocket screws. I added a couple of dominoes to keep it all aligned while I glued and screwed it together. Spending a little extra time making sure it was all clamped well could have also been an option. Pocket screws are quick, easy, and strong enough for this simple bench. I plan on building a table out of the same redwood at some point, and I will use some much more fun joinery on that build. I decided to try something new for the finish, and I ordered some pure tung oil. There seems to be a lot of information or misinformation out there about tung oil, but if it's pure tung oil, you at least know what you're dealing with. Stumpy Nubs has a great video on tung oil. Watch that if you're interested, and if you haven't seen it. This stuff went on really thick. You're supposed to let it soak in for about 20 minutes or so and then wipe off any extra. The thing is that it needs multiple coats, and each coat should dry for about 24 hours. Then it needs to be reapplied as needed to keep the protection level up. I don't think I would use this stuff on any project that I wasn't going to keep for myself for that reason. The grain running the way it's going, it's going to expand this way and contract this way. So with this slot, it'll be able to move here with the Z-clips. On these center pieces, I pushed it in and then pull it out to give it some slack in case it needs to contract, and it's not going to break these, give it any extra stress. I push it in all the way, pull it out a little bit, put the screw in. With the bench assembled, I moved it inside for a few weeks, long enough to even get some spider webs on it. I thought about adding more coats of tung oil, but after doing some experimenting, I decided not to. I was working on a table and doing some experimenting on the finish, and I wanted the bench to have the sheen that matched the table. I think I probably could have added it on top of the tung oil since enough time had gone by for it to dry. I just wasn't sure, so I resanded the bench top and then added a pre-stain conditioner, and then I used some Bidwell wood oil. After the first coat, I had a few spots where it didn't soak in consistently. After adding a second coat, the result was much better. This redwood is really pretty, and I'm happy to keep it out of a landfill and give it a second life by turning it into something useful. By using old growth redwood salvaged from old structures or warehouses, we're reducing the need to cut down new trees. It's a sustainable choice that helps preserve our forests. Here's the bench with the table I made to go with it. The table has a similar design, but it has tapered legs and castle joints for the joinery. Check out that video next. I'm really happy to finally be able to make a full-size table. I'll see you on that one.